Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pocket Politics. If you've been following the news as we have, you know the world's had a lot of crazy things going on. UFOs have been spotted all over the world and all over the United States. It's been a year since Russia's attempted invasion of Ukraine. President Biden has visited the country. There's talks of a national divorce, just to name a few. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at the Department of Energy, who stated that COVID-19 likely started in a lab in Wuhan, China. The talk of a national divorce. And at the end, we have a surprise debate of a very unique issue that doesn't get talked about too much. Starting off with the first topic of the night from the Department of Energy, they had a recent low confidence report that COVID-19 has likely started in a lab leak in China. Most details are still classified, and the GOP congressional members are calling for information. So, panel, why release this information now? I know this has always been, the wild conspiracy theory, if you will. Tell us your thoughts.
Well, I think there's two. There's more than two agencies that have come out and said that they believe, based on their analysis of the data, that the likely cause of COVID-19 was a lab leak in Wuhan, China. And then other agencies have said they think it's via natural causes through animal transmission, also near Wuhan, China. So I want to say this report from the Department of Energy had a medium certainty, and there's a report from the FBI that has a low certainty, but I could be wrong there. So yeah, I think I've got some thoughts about why now. What does everybody have a strong opinion about this? Do you think, is the science settled on this, or are you guys still on the fence about where that batshit virus came from?
I don't think the science will ever be, quote unquote, settled, because whatever evidence there was, I'm sure China has long since gotten rid of that and made sure we're never going to know quite what happened. I think the bigger question, though, what I've always wondered is, when did China really know that this was going to be bad? And when they did find out, did they take the necessary precautionary steps to limit it as much as they could? Or what I consider the more likely option B, where they well, we're getting screwed by this. We might as well just, let it loose and have everyone else be on a level playing field and get screwed as well. But in terms of the veracity of this report, I guess, people are going to believe what they want to believe. But I don't think we'll ever quite get to the bottom of what, truly was the origin of COVID.
That's pretty smart, pretty bang on. How about you, Sarah?
Yeah, I'm kind of with Ben on this. I don't think we will ever completely know. Because for one, I've actually heard it speculated that China might have known as early as like September of, I guess that was 2019, and they didn't really start saying anything until December or January of 2020. So there's just a lot we don't know, and they probably won't let anybody know. I think in terms of them coming out now and saying with the low and medium confidence that it might have come from like a lab, I mean, that's believable. It's something I could see happening. It's plausible. It's not that like wild, it's not that outlandish. But in terms of just like actually having a factual, it was this, I don't think we'll ever know. At least not for a very, 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 very long time, if ever.
Well, the CIA still won't release all the JFK files, so you're probably right. And that's in a democracy, so you're probably right. Audit.
I honestly don't know what to think. I mean,
that's exactly the effect they're looking for.
How the virus started, I don't know. I'm not a big science person, so that's not my strong suit. Both the lab leak argument and like the domesticated animal issue and like the sanitary issue are both very likely paths to get a global pandemic. I mean, those are ways normally diseases are spread. So, I mean, it's pretty likely. I think the bigger issue is for me, not necessarily like what China did or China's actions, but more of like the United States, of like when the United States knew that this pandemic was serious and their kind of responses. Because I think that personally, I think that China has had some pretty sketch like domestic policy. So like I don't know if they're the most reliable actor, but I think more importantly, like the people in a democracy should probably be having a better idea of like how the United States had knowledge of this disease.
Yeah, so are you implying that when the CDC and the NIH in December and January were early January were telling us there is no human to human transmission evidence? Are you saying that we might have known before that, or are you saying more of a saying something different, or because they were public, that's what they were saying? Is that what you mean?
I think probably maybe more of just like rather than just the disease potential, like the deadliness of the disease, but more like the effects of COVID outside of just like killing people, like shutting down the economy, etc. Because I remember like even December, I was talking to people my own age at the time, and they were like, yeah, this if China has a massive pandemic issue that has potential to destroy the global economy, right? And it was like those kind of discussions that probably were had in the United States, like whether it was their national intelligence or the CIA or even the White House. And it's like those kind of discussions, that knowledge that the United States had, I think is far more important, because a lot of domestic policy over the next 2.5 years were kind of dictated on the knowledge in December or November 2019. So I think that's probably the most important, in my opinion, of like where we should be looking.
I have a couple questions. What if it was a lab leak, but the lab operations to modify said coronavirus were paid for by the NIH, as say like Rand Paul alleges? Whose fault is it? And who should be paying the reparations to the world? Is it
It's still
America's fault?
China's
Is it China's fault? What do you think?
It's still China's fault. And I'm someone who's not a huge fan of Fauci, but taking that line of attack that because he might have given some money that could have been used in a facility that may be linked to COVID, I think that's a very weak argument, because especially for an organization like the NIH, money's going out and it's being used all over the globe to fund these types of research projects. So I think if anything happened, it's merely incidental. I don't think we should hold anyone accountable for that per se, other than China. I really think that I want to disagree with Audrey here. I think the buck kind of starts and ends with China here, because I don't think they're very forthright with their communications to the rest of the world. So regardless of what we knew before the pandemic, really hit, when we're talking about late 2019, early 2020, I don't think we got much of the full picture. I think we were pretty much in the dark. And I could be wrong, but I think 90 to 95% of the blame here starts and ends with China.
I was in Taiwan for Chinese New Year, and it was right when international news stories were covering the Wuhan virus, right? What was happening in Wuhan, and before it was even called like COVID-19. And it's funny because the Taiwanese knew what was up. I was wearing a mask in January because they had gotten burned, 10 years earlier with SARS. The same slow roll of information about SARS cost thousands of Taiwanese lives. And so everybody was like, nope, no more flying in from China. Nope, we're everybody wear a mask. We don't trust what they're saying. They knew exactly what Ben is saying, that for some reason, saving face is worth more than saving lives.
I also think that there was a
question.
similar situation, though. There was a similar situation with the United States where Ebola in 2014, 2015 was spreading around Africa. And there was news that there was like an animal or something with the Ebola virus, or like a group of animals that have been imported to the United States with the Ebola virus. And so there was knowledge that like, okay, there was the Ebola virus is was present in the United States, and they acted pretty quickly on it. I don't know, like, it does seem like even if China isn't the most forthright actor, they never really are. So, and the United States also has a massive intelligence network to kind of preempt this stuff. And I feel like if other countries who dealt with SARS, West African nations who dealt with Ebola and yellow fever were all prepared for COVID and the ramifications of COVID, kind of feels like the United States dropped the ball in terms of like mitigation, at least, and kind of alleviating the effects of COVID.
Do you think Trump owns some of that because he cut all that funding to the emergency response team or whatever inside the CDC or NIH?
I guess so, but I think there's just more there too, like in terms of like state legislatures as well, you know, not acting quickly enough. There's just like blame to go around. It's not centralized on one individual here.
Sure,
Even though that person like, even though Trump did make policy that like could have that hindered the United States' ability to respond.
There's only so much you can do bureaucratically. And a question I would pose to the rest of the panel, if in December of 2019, January of 2020, when things were really, you know, still all right in the United States, when there was probably single-digit cases throughout the country, if they had gone on and President Trump had done his press conference that he did, you know, it was like mid-March when he went and kind of, you know, addressed the nation and said, this is going to be a serious issue. And at that point, you know, there was cases in pretty much every state. People had started passing away. But if you rewind the clock another 2 or 3 months, do you think that you would have heeded that warning when you look around and no one you know has COVID? So I think, you know, at least anecdotally to me, I was, you know, a college senior at the time. I had no interest in staying in my house, right? Like if you had told me you got to lock it down and not do anything, I would have been like, screw that. There's nothing wrong. Like this is overhyped. So what I think, at least from my own experience, is that there was only so much that the government could really do prior to it getting really bad, and then people opening their eyes to, you know, the reality of what a pandemic really is. So I think, you know, it's kind of a moot point because public opinion would have been hard to sway before, you know, you started seeing some real disturbing stuff.
Yeah, I mean, without blood coming out of people's orifices or people eating other people, right? Like that early, I think like I watched a lot of Walking Dead, so I might have stayed in my house, right? But I hear what you're saying. I think it was a flu. Everybody, it's the flu, it's the flu, it's the flu, right? And that's what they said for 2 months. All right. I wanted to ask another question, but Andrew, you wanted to chime in.
You know, agreed. And Ben, I love the terminology. I mean, you do have to fight for your right to party, right? But thanks Audit for the support. And I heard what you were saying earlier regarding the U.S. response, but I think I'm gonna have to agree with Ben here. I mean, China, I think definitely owes the bag. I mean, China can't be over here, releasing viruses and then, you know, criticize, you know, particular nations, whether they be the United States or other states, if we can't, you know, if we can't get to it, because we wouldn't have this problem if it wasn't for them. So, I mean, at the end of the day, of course, there are policies you can always look at. Yes, but I mean, I'm not sure if it would be fair to say the U.S. is completely at fault. I mean, in my view, I mean, the Chinese, if you know, if this is obviously true and they were very extremely irresponsible in letting this virus out, I think every single death, or you know, and so on and so forth, is on their hands.
Is the issue more, I guess, for the US perspective, are we more concerned about like how well the government prepared people for it, or are we more concerned with vaccine rollout? Because at least from how I remember it, I think vaccine rollout was more of the issue, at least from our side, in terms of testing whether or not people would take it or not, because you can only mask up for so long before people either get frustrated or you can't keep doing that. So
well, you can't lie to people about the mask either. Sorry to talk over you, Sarah. Right? Like I apologize for talking over you, but you can't say cloth masks work and then say cloth masks don't work, right?
Yeah, so I guess like to my bigger point, are we for the Americans? Is it more about like how they treated it, like misinformation, disinformation? Is the vaccine safe? What mask can I wear? At least if we want to talk domestically, is that more of the focus?
I think going to what Sarah said, I could be mistaken, but I believe more people died in 2021 of COVID when the vaccine was readily available than 2020. So right, we had this life-saving measure, or maybe not quite life-saving, but at least, but definitely improved your chances of surviving COVID. Yet more people died when we had this medicine available than when we were just walking around masked up. So it seems like the response was a little bit better in 2020, at least at the outset, and more effective with preventing illness and saving lives than it was a year into the pandemic.
I just want to jump in. I think it was like 2020 though was like everyone, like the streets were barren, like nobody went outside. So I guess that's part of it. And then 2021, people started to have to go outside. So that may be part of it.
Or
I
they
think the
felt
bigger,
protected by the vaccine.
I don't remember. Because even when people got the vaccine, I live in California, so the rules are kind of different. So like they were like, you're still gonna have to mask up like 24/7, like all of that stuff. Like even the indoor masking policy was only lifted, I think it was April of 2022. So that was kind of a big thing. Or yeah, April of 2022 was when the indoor masking policy was lifted. So for me, it's kind of it was kind of like the whole thing of like just the inconsistency of rules. Like you would have like, oh, you need to like wear a mask like indoors, but you can't. You don't have to wear it outdoors. But then they changed it like a week later. It was like not consistent, and even like different counties, if you drive like 15 minutes to another city, they would have completely different rules, and it'd be like, that's not how you do disease prevention, because that's not like it's not restricted to a county. Like disease travels through the air, so it's not stopped by a border. So that was just kind of frustrating. At least for me, it was like also when they were like, oh, like the restaurant rule where like you can gather in like crowds. You couldn't gather in like a restaurant indoors, but you could do it at like Walmart, which was weird. I was like, that doesn't make a lot of sense.
We had the classic when you're at the beach for Memorial Day, it's spread. When you're packed shoulder to shoulder in the street, marching or rioting or protesting, it doesn't spread then. I think that was the ultimate, none of this really makes sense. And these people are kind of just coming up with things as we go along.
Exactly. It's how it felt. It's how it felt. Yeah.
So to your point, Sarah, I think that the question for tonight is more about how it began, but I do think that your question about, well, what about the rollout? What about policies? What about the vaccine? I think that's the bigger issue. The amount of faith that was lost in government, in institutions, in science, it's over, right? Like the trust, we were now I almost said something stupid here, but we were like a somewhat, we can understand now why people of color are distrustful of the government, a la the Tuskegee experiment, right? And when you break the oath, do no harm, when you let politics or racism, right, in the case of Tuskegee, violate the rules of science or leadership, that fence is really hard to mend. And there's a whole bunch of people that are never going to trust what the CDC tells them to do ever again. And there's a whole bunch of good doctors out there trying to talk science that have been blackballed. what was missing from that whole period was grace, which is what's missing from our country period. Is we should have had an allowable mistake percentage, and our leaders should have been honest with us that, hey, look, we think it's this, not this is what you do, this is how you stay safe, right? If you're a parent and you're driving and you're like 100%, we're never going to get in an accident, and you get in an accident, your kids don't believe you anymore, they can't trust you anymore. If you're like, hey guys, we got to wear a seatbelt because we might get in an accident, don't be scared, it doesn't happen, I've only been in one my whole life, but it could happen, right? They'll respect you and listen to you, and they'll be able to weigh their own options. Those were taken away from us. Yeah, the damage to our institutions was immense. Getting back to China, absolutely, if they withheld information that cost lives, they should be held financially responsible. But one of the people on our team, when we were circulating this story for tonight's podcast, asked me this question. He's like, well, why are they releasing it now? Why is that coming out now? And I have some really strong thoughts about that, and I wonder if you do too. When you guys saw this story, did you think, oh, this is coming out now because of blank? Did anything pop into your head?
I was gonna say, I think it's kind of like ironic it comes out shortly after the spy balloon, but they also might have just had to conduct investigations and it took time.
Yeah, I think the Politico with me says that it has to do with it being post midterms, at least somewhat, because I don't think there's a back channel between the White House and the FBI or the any type of government organization like that. But I think in general, most people in these institutions are Democrats, and they're pretty politically attuned. They're probably live in the bubble of DC, in the swamp. So I think these people know that if we release this right back in, like, let's say September of 22, August, October of 22, then those people who have been smeared as conspiracy theorists for saying things like this, it's going to be a little bit harder, and it'll be vindication for them, right? So I think in some close contests, especially like a congressional race or Senate race, some people who might have otherwise been skeptical of some voters who might have been skeptical of people that they viewed as conspiracy theorists based off of some things they said about COVID and about China, they could have been swayed by knowing these people were right in their hunches about where the virus came from.
All right, so Sarah says maybe the correlation of the Chinese spy balloon, and to discredit them more about that.
I think it's more so funny, but I do think Ben has a good point. That's the spy balloon's more of like a joke, whereas that's probably the more
okay.
answer. But then
Okay.
there's also just the boring. It might have taken time, internal reviews. They're slow over there. Things people don't always talk to each other.
Well, it's interesting because it's the Department of Energy, right, that released the report. And so are they looking at the power generation of the Wuhan lab? Like, I mean, they're scientists, and so maybe that's why they're doing a review. But Andrew, did you have a thought? Why now?
Excuse me, could be, politics, and the reason why I say that is because, I saw some, other stories saying, White House or, no one has an agreement on what origin of or what the origin of the COVID-19 pandemic is. And I think we're going to see something from the Biden administration try to take back, if you will, about what's going on and try to really walk on eggshells on how they go about this. I wouldn't be surprised right now if President Biden got on the phone with the Energy Department and been like, "What the hell did you just do?" Would not shock me at all. I think politics plays a role, and I can see of course, depending what happens in the next couple of weeks, I definitely see the GOP using this in 24.
Audit, how about you? Did you see anything? Did something pop into your head? Because obviously we're all sort of jaded, and so we're looking for the twist. But did anything pop into your head, or was it just like, okay, this is what's going on?
Honestly, I was kind of upset when they had like those contradictory rules, but like my 15, 16-year-old self was like, no school for 3 weeks. That was the only thing on my mind. So I was like, yes, no school.
Fair
That
enough.
was my number one priority.
So I think this report came out with the blessing of the Biden administration. I do think the White House has back channels to all the departments. I don't think Biden does. I think Valerie Jarrett or Susan Rice do. I mean, he's a white boy, but he's not stupid, right? He just said that today, by the way. So no, this is one thing and one thing only. It is a shot across the bow over Ukraine. This is all about World War III and China sending drones to Russia. And I think that this is sort of saying, hey guys, if you go kinetic, if you support Russia's kinetic activities, we're gonna try and pin COVID on you guys and the world and turn the world against you. That was the conspiratorial hat was just the timing. All these stories are coming about China's material support for Russia. So that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I want to like that idea, and it's perfect. But I did see another article today, which I think does hurt that theory a little bit, saying, from the Wall Street Journal, White House says no consensus on COVID origin. Whether or not they scientifically know where it comes from, they should just kind of run with it. And I mean, I think that would be the smart thing for the Biden administration to do for the American interest, is just kind of run with it and make this kind of the story.
It seems like the roles, like geopolitically, have been reversed here from what historically happens, and maybe that's like a sign of a significant shift in the terms of like the global order of power, because normally it would be China floating out something trying to discredit the United States, because really there's not much else they could do in the past, because we were the global superpower who had our tentacles all across the globe and had an iron grip on our interests. But it almost seems like this is the weaker actor trying to discredit the much more stronger and in control actor through it's almost like a Hail Mary, right? Like,
so I hear you, and I think it's a really smart way of thinking. But I listen to what Andrew says, but this is what I'm saying is, it's not saying China caused the pandemic, because you can't walk that back. You can't unring that bell, but you can say, wow, you can pick up a phone and call your counterpart and be like, yeah, the evidence is stacking up on our side. We can keep digging and you can keep sending drones. Or we can, I think this was, but again, I don't know. I look at this as possible diplomacy. It's Phil Jackson diplomacy, right? If you follow the Lakers, Phil Jackson would say something in the press to get back to his players, to get them motivated, right? The Zen master. But yeah, I mean, I'm hoping we have somebody this organized and thought out running stuff. But that was
how much longer we want to stay on this topic, but
it's us.
I was just going to say, I think 20 years ago, right, we could have come out and said China started COVID. We could have, rung the bell, and the rest of the world would have fallen in line. I think the larger point now is we're reduced to, well, we're not saying they did it, but look, it's possible, because we know even if we did say that we did it, most of the rest of the world would maybe not exactly fall in line with China, but they definitely wouldn't publicly stand against them the way they would have 15, 20, 25 years ago.
That's interesting.
It is.
They've definitely brought a lot of influence throughout the world, and they're the mutually assured economic destruction is the new nuclear bomb, right? The supply chain, they just turning off the boats. We saw what happened.
Right. Well, I think, we're on the subject of organization, diplomacy, and all that stuff. We go back to one of our favorite members of Congress, not really the most organized person. That's a figure of speech or sarcasm, if you will. MTG, Marjorie Taylor Greene. For those who don't know, she's gone gung ho on her national divorce proposal. Kind of her idea is to split red states and blue states and kind of make them their own, make them their own country. Most have seen this as a very fringe idea, but you'd be surprised it's a little bit more popular than you probably think it is. I think we've seen some polls where let's say 4 out of 10 Democrats and 4 out of 10 Republicans would, do consider this a real possibility and not necessarily the worst idea in the world. So I mean, I guess we'll start off with the first question around the panel. National divorce. What do you think? Is America too big? Is it time to split this thing up?
I mean, I can go first. That's
Yeah.
fine. Everybody
Go
seem to
ahead.
take a breath right there. We got a bunch of secessionists here. So I think that Texas was threatening to do this for a minute. Every few years, Texas is like, we are out of here. Okay. I would be for more breaking up, like redrawing state borders and keeping America a country. Like having what is it, West Colorado, like some of these mini states inside states, where you've got a large red population governed by a small blue city, or the reverse. Some blue urban areas governed by masses of rural land, and finding a new way to organize. I was telling you guys in show prep, I'm all for adding more stars to the flag, not so much for taking them off. So, yeah, I get it. But it's not, look, voting smarter, all of you are here because BS like this is red meat and blue meat, right? It's gets you to the polls, it gets you sending in your checks, but it's not really what America needs. It just helps keep the two parties in power. And we identified this problem, the pain that the duopoly causes, and we're trying to use, technology in the market to give people their power instead of parties. And this is one of those instances where, yeah, let's do it. I mean, 4 out of 10 Republicans and 4 out of 10 Democrats. So you're thinking, oh my God, 40% of America wants to break up. No. Right? Because only, 3 in 10 are Republicans and only 3 in 10 are Democrats. So this is just, I think, a gimmick. What do you guys think?
If we're going to reorganize that Northeast, there's too many small states. Create like 3 blocks. Like, I'm sorry, like sometimes when you go to the Northeast, it's just like Vermont is so small. Like Delaware, you just drive through it, you don't even notice it. Like you have to make the states large enough where you can't drive past it without even noticing you're in a different state. Right? So I think the consolidation there, I'm all for adding more stars. How that would work though would be very challenging. And I think that would lead to a lot of issues, just like from the process of governance, just adding like more people, more stars. But I think like the US territories that we have should definitely be states. There's no reason for, I think in 2023 for the United States to have like Puerto Rico, Guam, etc., to have like a lot of states and to be able to govern them without giving them the same like democratic principles that the whole country was founded on. So yeah, add those stars, but we could, the Northeast, figure that out. Just like little blocks.
Interesting, because they like almost the Hartford Convention, like the early 19th century. New England wanted to secede as a whole. And then in terms of Puerto Rico, they put it on the ballot and they keep voting like more or less to keep things the way they are. So that's up to the people at that point. And then, I mean, in terms of letting little places secede and form their own states, DC isn't even admitted yet as a state, and it has the population to. I think the issue or what's contentious about letting parts of states secede and become their own states, because it's happened before, look at Virginia and West Virginia. I think you'd have to keep the balance between red states and blue states similar, because that's what they did with Alaska and Hawaii, and also just as they were pushing westward. So if you admit like a small portion of rural, say California as red, then you'd have to admit like a small portion of a blue area and a larger red state to maintain that balance. Otherwise, the other side is going to challenge it and say this is a political move.
Yeah, I think to Sarah's point, you're talking about an additional 2 senators for every new state that gets added. So it could be something like, you know, if Western Massachusetts, which I assume is red, but I will defer to Andrew on that. No?
Not at all.
We'll
Not
say
even
Western
close.
New York.
Western New York.
Close.
Western New York, then maybe it's a situation like, well, maybe you allow Houston to become its own state because, you know, in theory, Houston's pretty blue. So that would, you know, in the middle of Texas would even out. But then you're just talking about a tit for tat, and it's like, it would never work. And to your point, Terry, it's red meat for the base. Marjorie Taylor Greene has her eye on the vice president slot for 2024. So she's doing what she can to be MAGA #1. So yeah, it's nothing more than just political theater. I don't think there's any kind of meat on that bone.
Real quick before we move on, I have a problem with saying like, oh, like if you got to keep everything balanced, you know, you gotta give one for the red, one for the blue. I'm like, why? That's not our job to make. Like, it's your job to for us to make you vote for you. Like, it's not. We shouldn't be creating an environment where you have a chance at like 50 out of 100. Like,
Well,
it's like,
yeah,
it seems like a you problem that you can't get all of the votes.
What
Like,
I'm
that's-
saying is,
I'm not saying like
we-
that's how they should do it, but historically, when they are admitting states, that is how they did it. I'm not advocating for it, but history is like this is how it's happened. Because like back before the Civil War, that was a big deal, and there was a balance per se that needed to be maintained. And then afterwards, given it's a 2-party state, the other party can just sit there and say, oh, this is unfair. This is a political move. We're not admitting this state. So while it's not necessarily the best, if you're just trying to admit states, it is historically shown that it grows when you try to admit and keep a balance. But they thought Hawaii was going to be a red state and Alaska was going to be a blue state. So we see how it works out. Sometimes the states flip, sometimes they change. So
One had
once-
oil, one had coconut oil. It was different.
Exactly. So once they are admitted, they can change, and then they do have to fight for your vote. But in terms of getting them into the union, historically, that's why it's been that way.
Piggybacking off of what Sarah said, I also agree that yes, it's not on anyone, or not any one party is entitled to the votes of any voters anywhere, but logistically, like if the Democrats see that all of the rural parts of these red or blue states are breaking off and, you know, adding 2 senators per state, per new state, what's going to stop them from being like, hey, Governor Newsom, hey, Gavin, let's break California up here. We're going to get 10, right? Oh, screw it. We'll do 12, you know? So at what point does it stop? Because whether we like it or not, everything is political at this point. So, I mean, you'd be talking about like, we'd be having like 200 states. Because once you open that Pandora's box and set the dominoes off, it's not, there's no end to it.
They won't
Right.
admit DC because it'd be like a lone deep blue state, and there's seemingly right now nothing to change it. So that balance of power would almost always be in the Democrats' favor, and that's partly why they will not admit DC.
Well, I like to say DC becomes part of Maryland. I feel like that
Well,
would
I
be a
would
good
like that
compromise.
too. Well,
Yeah.
maybe. Yeah, maybe. Or it goes to Virginia. Who knows? Virginia gives them part of the land back.
Yeah, I've seen it being absorbed by a state. I agree. Look, the logistics of this is makes it damn near impossible without violence, right? Like the last time we tried this, I do agree that drawing the lines around stupid political parties isn't the right way to do it, but to get it done, it's how you'd have to do it with the quid pro quo of the, washing each other's back in a really gross cesspool. Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't want to interrupt your point, but I thought about something. If the goal is to be more democratic per se, and let people have more closely represented by the representative, if you split the little regions off, even if it does maintain a blue-red status quo, you'd potentially have a smaller proportion of people to representatives. So even though the balance of power, big picture might not change, people do have more representation. So that is something to kind of, I guess, hypothetically consider.
Well,
True.
and people argue that Wyoming shouldn't have 2 senators when California does, right? Like that's unfair. It gives too much power to the average Wyomingian, whatever, the average Cheney. Nothing's ever going to be fair. It's a really interesting. I was going to ask you, what do you guys think about how we decide senators? Should we go back to them being appointed?
No, you know what? I would not mind going back to originally how it was. Now I got to jump in the first portion because I didn't jump in the first question. I'm not entire. I'm kind of open to the idea. It depends on very closely what's the word I'm looking for, conditions that I definitely won't happen. The Confederacy, I just wanted straight start, was not a place to be, and we all know why they left. They left for one reason, which was slavery. If a new state, and I'm going to use my home state of New Hampshire, were to secede, because for those who don't know, for the first time, I think since the Civil War, the state house, and probably the only state house, actually had a vote to secede from the Union on the state house floor. Now it failed, but a group of House representatives in the state of New Hampshire filed a constitutional amendment, which then went to the voters of the state of New Hampshire to have a constitutional amendment to tell the United States that they would leave. And from my understanding, I was not supportive of that, and the reason why is because the people going towards it, I think, were having racial sentiments, and and reason why they want to do is for not the correct reasons. But that said, I also know there's been movements, especially from I know there's been an argument through Black Panthers, I believe, and other civil rights groups, like, hey, let's leave and kind of make an independent area that's good for us people to thrive. And I would be open to something like that, but I unfortunately just don't see that happening in any large scale whatsoever.
I guess to the national divorce point, the last time like states legitimately tried to secede was the Civil War. Are
Yep.
politics really that bad right now? Like, we don't have bleeding
It is.
Kansas. There is no Nat Turner. There's no John Brown. So like, what are people so unhappy about?
I think
I want to be a sovereign state.
Yeah,
I just want my land to be sovereign.
It's that, but even culturally and politically, I mean, since the Civil War, I shouldn't say since the Civil War, but at least in modern times, they have been getting more people have been getting away from each other, and they're not really as close as they once were. The differences have been drastically changing, I think, throughout the country. I mean, whereas of course there was always differences between states. I mean, if you were in Massachusetts and decided to go to Kansas in the 80s, you were going to see some differences, but it still seemed like you were relatively in the same country. Whereas I think if let's say you're in Boston, Massachusetts right now, and you decide to go to Kansas, it's like you're almost two different places. Like you're almost not in the same country anymore. The only thing you really see maybe the same is a couple American flags, but the cultures are extraordinarily different. The people there, of course, are extraordinarily different. It's just a totally different way of life and totally different set of politics.
But at the end of the day, as your average, if you go, I've not traveled abroad, but from what I've heard, if you go abroad, you can tell who another American is, even if they're from a completely different state. I'm just not convinced that each region in America is that radically different nowadays.
That's because they're wearing white socks with sandals.
Huh?
That's because they're wearing socks with sandals. That's why they're American. Or cargo shorts if they're
Yeah,
Amer-
no, like there's just,
they're
there might
traveling.
not be a big thing of American, but there are little things that you can just pick out an American. Or if
Well,
you
we're
look
also-
around, like, somebody will
like,
pick
big
out, they're
vaccine.
all Americans, whether you're from New York or you're from Kansas, a foreigner will know you are still an American because you hold certain traits. I would
So-
argue that that was very different in pre-Civil War days.
Oh, possibly. So a couple of thoughts here. First off, this whole story is bullshit because it's not that half the country hates the other half. It's, 3 in 10 hate 3 in 10, right? You've got one sibling that hates the other sibling, but there's a bunch of kids that all love each other. And so it's a false premise. Second off, if you're a member of Congress, you swear an oath to the Constitution. Shut up about divorce. Do your job. Change people's minds, right? Lead, as you said, lead, Sarah. And so I just think that she's a cartoon figure. This is a cartoon idea. And last thought, if New Hampshire, if you're gonna leave, you got to take 1/50th of this damn $31 trillion worth of debt with you. You don't get to leave without taking some of this debt. That's what I'm going to say to everybody.
And take Vermont and Connecticut with you too.
No. We're
And
not
Bill
taking Vermont.
Belichick
We're not taking
and the
Vermont.
Celtics.
Well, I guess we do hockey up here.
Exactly. It's time to go. So look, I live in California. I live in what was a red stronghold and is now somewhat purple. I'm a libertarian conservative, if that's a thing. I pay way too much in taxes. I don't like the way the homeless are really being harmed here, in my opinion. I don't like a lot of the government policies. You would think I'm a huge fan of direct democracy, but the proposition system in California is broken. If there's a lot of stuff here in California that's broken, and I'm never leaving. I love California, and your weather everywhere you are sucks.
For
Right?
real,
Like,
for real.
I'm not my wife is never, if we secede, we're Californians now. Like, I'm not getting my family out of Cali. And so I'm going to be stuck in a blue country. So I really don't like this divorce idea. I think, look, and I'm sure we all agree on this. We have to work on making America great again. No, I'm just kidding. Making America united again. And that if it ever were, live up to that idea of the United States of America. United is the first word. I don't know. This was a fun topic, but I'm hoping it's bullcrap.
I think we're going to see this. It's probably never going to hit a majority, at least especially when we're alive, and probably never, but I don't think it's going away anytime soon, especially in my home state, especially with the Free State Project. And with, as long as Marjorie Taylor Greene is there, I don't think statements like these are going away anytime soon.
No, that's true. That's true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Let's
kind of
get
an American's history. I mean, we started out with the Articles of Confederation. That's how it was originally designed. Then we got the Constitution. And I mean, Thomas Jefferson, he put Virginia on his headstone, not president. There's always been a tension between, is your loyalty to your state or is it to the Union? That's it's always been something America has to struggle with.
And Sarah, that is a perfect line into our surprise topic right now. Okay, so before we started recording, we just randomly came up with this argument regarding, I think, mandated military service, and we all just went off. And I'm like, we have to bring this to the show. And I'm going to turn it over to you because I know how passionate you were about this. So, mandated military service, the draft. Tell me about it.
Absolutely not. If there is a draft, I'm dodging it. I am 100% against mandated military service. I am not serving for the military now. It doesn't matter that they would pay for college. It doesn't matter that they would give me any of the benefits. I wouldn't do it. I'm not putting my life on the line. And I don't think you can ask millions of Americans to do the same either. And I just think that, like, what the military is for, right? The theoretical justification of the military is like to defend America. But when is the last time we've really defended America? World War II? World
Yeah,
War
that's what
II?
I'd say. That was the last
And it's
justified war
like-
in my book.
And it's like, okay, so we're probably never going to get another world war. And in the meanwhile, you're going to have me fighting some random war so that some rich CEO can get some stock in some new oil ventures or some new diamonds. Like, I personally don't want to do that. And that's fine if you do. You know, if you want to go expand America's economic power globally, go for it. Like, it is a free country. But I personally just wouldn't want to. And I think that, like, countries that have mandated conscription, South Korea, Israel, etc., like, you have people trying to actively dodge it all the time. And these countries are dependent on the United States anyway. They're small militaries, and they're just like, the justification is, oh, you got to defend their people. But it's like, I don't know. Like, I don't think that's really what the military's been about all this time. So,
Terry, and
All
Terry,
right.
then we'll go over to Ben.
So I want to clarify your position on it. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions. And full disclosure, I have not served in the military, and it is a regret of mine. But hypothetical time, China nukes San Francisco, right? Your family's in the Bay, I recall. You're in college, you're safe. And does that change your opinion? Like, so are you saying I don't want to be drafted into the bullshit wars of the 60s?
oh,
70s?
no, like, this is like a
Or
thing
it's
of
like,
like,
no matter what,
no matter
kill
what.
my family, I'm not fighting.
Yes, I will never fight a war. I'm not built for it. And that's okay. Like, you know, I'm admitting that I'm not built for the war. I like the indoors. I like the AC. I like my technology. I like my life. I wouldn't risk it, you know?
Okay.
Even if there was like a doomsday scenario, I mean, at that point, like, I would obviously like take up arms and like defend myself, but it's like I wouldn't. I feel like the military, I think that the United States doesn't really care about the military. Like, the people who run the military don't care about the people who are actually fighting. And I think that's been shown over the past 50 years. So you can't convince me that, oh, you're doing this greatest duty and we all support you and we all respect you when you don't show it. Like, you can't trick me into this false sense of like respect or authority. I won't fall for it. I won't fall for it. I'm familiar with your game.
So I look, I think that latter part of your statement is a defendable place to be. The I'm too soft, not defendable, and not true. And I think we need people who can argue in the military, right? So that's your strength, right? You got to motivate the men and women around you. You can do that. Go run up that hill so I don't have to. I mean, that's basically what you're saying anyway. And so you just have to be one of those corrupt officers you're talking about. So I think that's a false premise. I was surprised when you said, no, if America actually attacked and my family's killed, I'm not going to take up arms to defend her. I was surprised by that. But I think they're two separate things. If you're saying the military industrial complex is too corrupt, has too many fingers in our government for me to trust a national service requirement, then that's a reasonable argument. But if we were to correct that, you're still saying hell to the nizza. Okay. Okay. I disagree. I'm a big fan of mandatory service. I don't think it should have to be military. I think you should either have to join the military, the National Guard, which should always be separate from the military, the Peace Corps or AmeriCorps, and you should be compensated in some ways for those 2 years of your life. I think that the reason South Korea does it, yes, they are protected by the United States from the majority of their enemies. They do it to build national unity and brainwash kids. Israel does it because they face an existential threat in their eyes. And, you know, Taiwan does it, but yet they've never fought a war, right? It's a period of training and learning and being ready. So I think that your attitude about this is evidence of why we need it.
Okay, Ben, I'm going to turn it over to you because I know you've been waiting. I can see it. All right, Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't want to be the back in my day guy because that's what we have Terry for.
Oh,
But I on a large scale, I think it's undeniable that especially in the United States and especially young men would benefit from the discipline and the structure and the motivation of service. And I can tell you, I can identify with audit because that's what I would have said my freshman year of college, right? I could completely identify with that. But I feel like I've gotten to the age now where I can sort of look back into what we'll call like my younger adulthood or like, your teenage adult years. And the benefit that would have set me up for so much more discipline and rigidity in my life that you're all going to face it we're all going to face it at some point, right? Like you're going to need to develop some discipline. And there is no better way of doing that than joining the military. And for the motivation issue, like that's not an issue. They will find a way to motivate you. You can ask anyone that's been in the service. That would be a non-factor. But to put a bow on it, I think that service really only has benefits. And I don't know if we would even be fighting a war, right? I think this would just be more for the collective good of young men, and could be young women too in society who need to learn the personality traits and the benefits that kind of structure in your life provides you. And we would be setting up so many people for a lot better experiences later in life because they'd be developing so many skills that you're just not going to develop at age 18, 19, 20 naturally. But that being said, there's no way in hell that would ever happen because the uproar wouldn't just be limited to audit, right? So I don't think it's a realistic possibility, but I wholeheartedly support the notion that it would benefit society as a whole.
I think that the skills that you're talking about though are not exclusive to the military. Like I'm not this like degenerate person with no like rigidity in my life. Like I'm fine. I have the skills necessary to be independent, and I don't need the military for those skills. I think that there's some people choose to use the military to learn those skills, but I think like a good portion of people who are successful adults have those like disciplines. And
look at income disparity. And when you say successful adults, you're talking about 5 to 10% of the population.
I'm going to say the median 18 or 19-year-old, right? The median American teenager does not have the skills. And if they do develop those skills,
so send them, not me. Send them, not me.
All right. So I mean, I like where it's going. I'm going to make it a little bit more serious. I want to bring Sarah to the conversation. For those who don't know, selective service in this country for American men, you have to do it when you're 18, well, between 18 and 25, but you're supposed to sign up for it as soon as you turn 18. And in order to get, I think, student loans, I believe when I even applied for my
FAFSA.
I'd be wrong about this.
FAFSA.
My FAFSA, yeah, you need it for FAFSA. Now I think I may have needed it when I was getting my house loan or something. There was something related. I believe they were looking for. Terry,
if you got an FHA loan, it's possible.
If an FHA loan,
if you got a government loan, maybe.
Right. There's a lot. I know for many different things in life for American men, you need to
And women
be
now,
able to
right,
show
Sarah?
show you do it. No, I don't
Women
believe
too.
so.
I thought they added
Nope,
women a few years
nope,
ago.
nope, not as far as I know. So, Sarah, the reason why I want to, ask you this, there's obviously, of course, a difference here. And some men's right activists would call an unfair advantage from women. So, really, I guess what's your perspective? Do you think women should be just like men, be assigned to do selective service? Or should it be like no one should be assigned, or should it just be just the way it is now? I'm not sure if that's something you ever thought about.
Yeah, I've actually thought about this a lot because
Oh.
while I'm against the draft in principle, I don't think it's fair to take an 18-year-old and send them out to potential like war. That just seems cruel to me. If they choose to do it, perfectly fine. But I think if we're gonna say there is a selective service, yeah, I think women should be included in it. Like does your average woman like can she get in shape to be like a Navy SEAL? No, but most men can't either. There's no reason though, like women can't fly and can't be drafted and go fly an airplane. There's no reason why they can't do other things, because not everything in the military is like sheer brutal like amphibious land invasion. I think a lot of women would also benefit very much so from getting the discipline, the communal teamwork that comes with military service. So while I'm against the draft and in practice, I would advocate more for something that Terry mentioned. So you have to do some type of service, because also, as Ben mentioned, it does teach a lot of very good things. And then, yeah, at the end of the day, as I am approaching a birthday, I would say that actually my biggest regret right now is not applying for either the Air Force or the Naval Academy when I was in high school, as my mom wanted me to at least try, or not doing ROTC in college, because those were always things that I looked up to a lot as a kid. My dad was in the Air Force, and then his dad was he was in World War II. My dad's old. And so I always just wanted to do that. And then as I got older, kind of lost that discipline, kind of lost that drive. And then now I'm older, out of college, and I look back and I say, no, that is where I wanted to do it. That is what I wanted. That is what I should have just followed on that path.
Right.
Well, a couple thoughts. Okay, you want to jump in, Andrew? I wanted to address Sarah's things.
No, please.
I also in general just I stare at airplanes on maps all day anyway. So
Yes.
like you should probably take that with a grain of salt.
So what I'll tell you, Sarah, is one of my good buddies was in ROTC during our PhD program, which was unusual. And they took him in as soon as he got his master's. They're like, you got a degree, you're in. And he had to write his dissertation while on the job. But now he teaches at the War College. Right. And so I would tell you that you could look, you're not too old to fly planes. You could go right after this and join the Air Force. So if it's, don't wait. I mean, when I turned 40, I was just passing the ceiling of service, and we had young twins, and one of my students was in the Navy intelligence. He got me like a waiver, and the wife vetoed it one more time, and so but it would be as a reservist. So you could join as a reservist with your flying experience on that stuff. So I would encourage you to intend to do that. I am wearing my grandfather's hat, who fought in World War II. This was his boat, the USS Jason. I know Audit had to leave us early tonight, but here are my thoughts against the arguments. I'm also a big advocate for freedom, and I understand being against a draft. And I think a draft is different than mandatory service. I think that letting someone choose National Guard so they'd only be deployed for national emergencies or domestic attacks is different than foreign wars. And so that's how I would draw that line there between those two units of service. And then I would supply people with the option of conscientious objection through AmeriCorps, the Peace Corps, things like that. But here's the big takeaway to Audit's thing. Right now, we're standing on the prosthetic shoulders of giants. Right? We have 200,000, couple 100,000 brave men and women go fight for us all over the world in these conflicts that most of us probably don't agree with, and we get to stand on their prosthetic shoulders, right? Because they come back wounded. And if everybody had skin in the game, if everybody's kid was in the military, our a-hole leaders wouldn't be able to get away with all this BS.
Right.
Larry, to tie it back to your point and even the previous discussion, do you think there's a correlation between, let's say the starting point is the greatest generation, right? And it's George H.W. Bush, the old, what was the senator? He was the GOP nominee in '96.
Bob Dole.
Bob Dole, all these,
America loves Bob Dole. Bob Dole loves America. Yeah.
and not just the politicians, right? An entire generation of people.
My grandfather.
Your grandfather, Sarah's grandfather, who, you know, they went through this experience of, and I'm sure none of us can even realize, you know, what that must have felt like. But to go through this really rally around the flag experience where everyone had skin in the game.
Yep.
And so as those people become older, right, and they become leaders and politicians, and there's, you know, more civility in our conversations, in our discourse. Do we think now that we can trace the slow and steady decline of civility that's been particularly in politics and just in society in general to the loss of having, you know, that shared experience of, you know, we're American and we're all going to go and serve our country and put our lives on the line? Because we've seen as that generation has died out and, you know, gone through being in power and then, you know, letting go of power, we've seen a decline in all types of civility.
100%.
I mean, I think that's definitely, you know, a figure, definitely an option. However, I will come back with this. I think we take a look at the greatest generation, or even veterans now. I mean, they really fought for, you know, our right, if you will, to, you know, kind of be that way. And what I mean by that is I mean, I imagine if you ask any of them, whether it be current veterans now, you know, our grandfathers or grandmas, remember they, you know, they played a role too, building planes, building the stuff to send to the troops. Don't forget about them. In fact, if you were to ask them, it's like, hey, I think we should do that again, or do you think you would want to do that all over again? They're probably gonna say no, because no one wants another World War II. That would be devastating. I mean, if World War II could have been avoided, I imagine everyone who fought in that war would say, yeah, if there was an option not to fight, there was a way to get rid of Hitler without the deaths of so many people. It would have been
an option not to fight and trying to get rid of Hitler, because once the war broke out, there were tons of people that just volunteered because they
This
felt
guy volunteered. He wasn't drafted.
They wanted
beforehand. Before
everyone wanted to have skin in the game.
Yeah,
I think it's why I'm saying we can't even fathom what that type of like nationalism must be like, because this was, as opposed to what we're talking about now, being forced to do something. This was, you didn't want to be the one who wasn't contributing.
True.
So like to your point, Andrew, I don't think we'd ever go back there, because obviously there's a lot of carnage and casualties that come along with that. But
right.
I just think that having that experience as an entire generation clearly stayed with most of those people the rest of their lives. And
right.
And
Well,
I think
I'm sorry, Sarah, please.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, I think it's kind of interesting that we start off talking, well, middle of the conversation is MTG, national divorce, and we end it with, no, military service or some sort of like national service is ultimately a good thing for like you on the individual level, and then for society as a whole. And then to your point, Ben, about like the decline of, did he say civility? One of those adjectives. Yeah, you can definitely see that. Like John McCain, love him or hate him, if you're just going off of pure character and the way he carried himself, very different person than Marjorie Taylor Greene.
That's well said. Look, I think, are you allowed to say nationalism, Ben? I think that's actually one of the banned words we're not supposed to say anymore. It's colonial. It's I think it's a American empire. I think that's what So 100%, you're right, the germination point. But let's look at the 60s and 70s of the anti-war movement, what the draft did to America during Vietnam. This was one of those BS wars where they abused the draft. And we ended up with the people who were not national, that trust was betrayed. That the government had given us, or that had earned, or whatever the American people had in each other. And then we got taught by all the beatniks that they became the professors, and nationalism is evil. And so,
Correct, Terry, I just wish I had a button to like say yes, that's right.
I mean, that's what happened. And I think that even back then we allowed partisanship to rule us, because you could be we got caught up in the BS that, well, you're anti-American if you're anti-war in Vietnam.
What was that, the
And-
greatest generation sitting around being like, look at these kids, how lazy they are, smoking their pot and listen to the Beatles. They, it was an honest attempt to be like, well, what would do them good? It's the military service and a rally. I mean, obviously not the only factor, but in some sense, right? It was the greatest generation getting a little bit older and not liking what they saw from younger generations and being like, well, it worked for us.
The greatest generation were not the greatest parenting generation. That's for sure. And those chickens came home to roost. And so, look, I think there's a lot of things during that transitional period post-war that has led us here today, right? The space program gets us to cell phones, which gets us to the level of self-absorption that we all have, right? No, I'm not fighting for y'all, right? The birth control pill gets us to the breakdown of the American family that then changes the moral mores of society, both for the better and for the worse.
Right.
That gets us to this other thing where we don't have respect for each other, even though we disagree.
Right.
And lastly, the elimination of sort of this era of national service definitely decreases our level of nationalism. And so, yeah, I think what you said is really smart. And I do think it's an ironic twist that we went from divorce to marriage.
Correct.
One last thing though, the military, or at least World War II, it did bring integration, and it also got women into the workforce.
Yep.
So two very, very big things that catalyzed lots of changes in the next half of the century, and for the better.
Right.
For sure. We all, if the guy next to me is bleeding red when he's shot, I don't care what he looks like on the outside, right? That was the mentality of many people who had never looked at a person of color and saw their equal. And then they looked at on the battlefield and found them superior oftentimes, right? And so whether it was in the skies, whether it was on the ground, no, I think that's a great point. And look, I don't know how mankind has had it twisted for so long that women are not the glue of society and should have a lot of the power, probably more than equal power, right? And they're what make humanity great. Yeah, I don't know. I think, I would just, I ate it on that one. But
well, I mean, look, we're running long. I mean, I think every generation, of course, is a little different on the way they address things. And you're right. I think the government messed up a lot of things, especially with Vietnam, and even of course, even going forward, whether it be in Iraq or in Afghanistan. I don't think you're ever going to have that same vindication, if you will, with service as you did in World War One, World War Two, especially, because I think we haven't had this big idea of a massive boogeyman like you did with Hitler, in World War Two. I mean, of course, that's always a great
Japan's
story.
attack, though,
And
Japan,
Pearl
Harbor got us into
World War
II.
That's true, but of course, I mean that we also, again, Hitler was the boogeyman, so were the Japanese. I mean, there was a huge hate. Well, the emperor, if you will. Excuse me. Thanks, Jerry.
No, you just stuttered. You just stuttered like you were reading a headline from the 1940s, and I was like, "Whoa, whoa!"
But I don't think we're gonna have that here, and I think we've tried to do the same thing with Saddam Hussein or even Al Qaeda, and you're just not, and I don't think you're gonna ever get that same. I mean, you had a little bit with after 9/11, but I don't think you're ever gonna get that same type of motivation, morale, national pride as you did with World War II. I just
Well,
don't see it happening.
I think also now youth is just marked by being like rebellious and anti pretty
Yep.
much everything. I don't know if it's been like that forever, but at least since probably the 50s, 60s. So
Right.
if that culture, it's not going to be taken up by the bulk of the young people nowadays.
Right.
I mean, like
Hey.
people, MTG is talking about a national divorce. Red states go here, blue states go here. And it's like, well, then why do we fight this civil war then? I don't know.
Yeah.
I do think technology changes this as well. The Russians, we talked pre-show about playing Risk, but there's another game I like to play that emulates World War II, right? Called Axis and Allies. And basically,
Harry, you did not play that.
oh heck yeah.
Did too.
Yeah. Oh no, there's some selection bias here in this group for sure. No, it stayed on the table for a month. We had a game going for a month in my post-marriage house. I mean, like how my wife put up with that, I have no idea. I was a grown-ass man. And so I should have been wearing this hat though. The idea, if you're ever Russia in that game, all you have are men. You just keep throwing more men into the buzzsaw of war. More men, more men, more men. And so I do think post World War II, we looked at war differently and the value of a human life differently. Now, all over the world, they didn't, right? If you're a Hootsie or a Tootsie, right, maybe that value of life wasn't viewed the same. And many here in America would argue that maybe we don't because of the death penalty or abortion or racism. Okay. So I think it's going to be difficult for a leader to get their people to do what people did back then, but then I maybe not. But technology will get us to another world war. And honestly, I think we're closer than we've been to a world war in my lifetime. Yeah.
It's gonna be a different one. It's gonna be a different one though. I mean,
you have nuclear weapons. Nobody wants to use those. Like that could potentially be like an end all
Right.
be all. And that did not
right.
exist too. There's also lots of international, like cross-border, whatever business interests that would destroy economies. There's a lot more at stake right now than there was before World War II,
Right.
whether it is like complete economic collapse or like nuclear weapons.
Right.
And
No,
there's
I mean,
intelligence and diplomacy to mediate.
Our World War III will be our the previous generation's World War I. And what I mean by that is World War I, no one really knew what they were going into, brand new weapons. I mean, these were young kids going into something that they've never seen before, machine guns, tanks, airplanes, all this was like unique to them, right? There was no war ever fought like that. And that's why shell shock was so huge then, because the amount of violence and gore, and there was nothing ever like that before. People used to stand in lines and use horses and charge you with a sword. Now you have, now people are getting ripped apart right in front of you, and and if it does happen, that does scare me. If there is, God forbid, a next world war, because they will be fought with weapons that they can't even fathom, and hope to God me and my son, if that ever happens, are dead if that ever comes to life.
Just don't
Yeah.
draft any struggling artists
Yep,
into that war.
Why is that? Is that Hitler? Was he a
That's
struggling
right.
artist?
Yeah.
he was.
Yes, he was.
You can say nationalism, or you can't say nationalism, but you can say Hitler.
Yeah, as long as I'm talking about a Republican.
Alrighty. I
Makes
think it's
sense.
time to call it a night. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Come back, see us again in 2 weeks where we have another great episode. Terry, Sarah, Ben, Otta, I know you have to leave a little early, but thank you all. Appreciate everyone and a great, I think, discussion today. So good night, good
All right.
night, good afternoon, good morning, whatever it is. Have a good time, everybody.
Take care, guys.